Welcome everybody to the DevOps Online Summit 2021. My name is Craig Pearson and I'm the SRE track this year, and I'm sitting with our amazing speaker today, Avinash Rao, who will be sharing some insights and inspiring stories on the subject of action, making SRE happen. How fast and what do we break along the way? So welcome, Avinash. Great to have you here today. Would you like to start by just telling us a bit about yourself and your journey so far with DevOps?
Sure. Great to be here. And I've got about 20 years in the IT industry. Started out as a consultant, did a lot of, it used to be cool in those days, did a lot of business process re-engineering, did a lot of work around improving the processes that companies really use in order to generate value. So I've always been somewhat of a process person. And very early on in my career, I learned that there are two types of problems that we solve. There are efficiency problems and there are effectiveness problems. A lot of my career since has been working with customers, with organizations, with either efficiency problems or with effectiveness problems. And also the lens that I bring to the table. In order to describe that, I'll have to tell you a little bit of a story. And to all the viewers, I did warn Craig that I am a bit of a story guy. So many years ago, I used to live in London with my family. I spent 3 years there. And there was a Taekwondo class right in our apartment. And I took my daughter there and I said, why don't you join the class? So my daughter, who was 5 at the time, looked around and she said, I'll join if daddy joins. So I put on the white uniform, and there are just 2 people there in the entire class who are above the age of 30. Actually, I think above the age of 20, actually. The rest are all school and college kids. And then there's me, and there's another gentleman. He works with motorcycles. He has a Harley parked outside. He has bulging skull tattoos on his biceps. He has a blonde ponytail. And the instructor comes by and says, now, gentlemen, you are going to grab each other by the throat. And in 5 minutes, you will free yourself and you'll throw your opponent on the ground. 5 very painful minutes later, which I literally couldn't move, the instructor came by and said, Avinash, even if you took steroids and worked out for a year, the other guy still would be stronger than you. So this isn't a hard work problem. It's a technique problem. So what you need to do if somebody grabs you by the throat and they're standing in front of you is pinch them under the underarms. There are no muscles there. So it will hurt. They will let you go. Then you pinch and twist, essentially. And by the end of the first class, if my partner did grab me by the throat, I was able to free myself and throw him down on the ground. And that is just something that has stuck with me all through my journey with Agile and then with DevOps. Because it isn't about hard work. It isn't about telling our teams that, you need to crank out more code, you need to do this, you need to do that. It has to be right first time. It was all right for the industry to say that we're going to beat quality in, right? Even about 10 years ago, they used to have these massive QA teams. I remember that we used to have about 40 to 50% of our team consisted, especially on large programs, who consisted of people who would simply beat quality in.
Okay.
I've myself been guilty of having conversations where I've told my QA team, I don't care what dev does. You guys are my partners. You have to make sure that it comes out right and in a stage that we can actually take to the market. And what a change it's been with first with Agile, then with DevOps, and now with SRE, right? That would simply not be acceptable anymore. I wouldn't be funded even either by my own organization or by a customer organization to spend that much of time on fixing things that weren't done right first time. And that's really been this tremendous drive towards getting things right first time, which DevOps and now SRE is really bringing in.
Okay, because that's good. So in terms of the analogy, I do like the analogy around Taekwondo. Right. I suppose a bit like the other martial arts. I mean, I studied karate when I was young. There is judo, there is various other martial arts. And it feels a bit like the marketplace we're in. We've had Agile, we've had DevOps, and we've had SRE. different techniques, as you've described, to solve similar kinds of problems. So you said in the topic of your talk today that it would start with action. And the analogy I have in mind is a bit like Hollywood when they're recording films. You see the board go, snap, action. So what happens for you then when the camera starts rolling?
So what is, particularly with SRE, and not as much in my agile work or in the DevOps work, but particularly with SRE, a lot of organizations, managers, directors, and VPs are looking at SRE and then saying, I want one of those.
Yes.
And then they turn to people like me, like us actually, and they say, make it happen. I don't care what you need. You tell me what you need. You'll get what you need. Now, boom, make it happen. And immediately, we start going in and looking at what the best practices are, right? I mean, the journey to SRE is reasonably well defined. It has reasonable goalposts. We know that we need our SLIs, we need to set our service level objectives, that you have your error budgets inside which we must make our changes. And then you look at what we actually have on the ground. You have dev teams, you have op teams, you have support teams. And then you say you're going to now spend 50% of your time working on trying to make the system better. But do they have the right skills and orientation in order to suddenly make that transition into making things better? A lot of them are very, especially in programs which have been ongoing for a relatively long period of time, the skills as well as the orientation is very much, here is a support ticket, I'm going to work on it now, and I've met my SLAs, so therefore I've done my job. It's a similar thing with the dev teams as well as with the ops teams as well. Especially if there hasn't been first an agile transformation and then a DevOps transformation, and we are trying to jump right in to do SRE, it is extraordinarily hard. And part of the title says that what do we break along the way, right? So what are the changes that must happen in the orientation of the people first, before we can even start thinking about the changes that must be made in the process is really, really important. And what I wanted to talk about a little bit was that it's now fairly common for a lot of companies to be very familiar with Agile. So sprints are, almost de rigueur. But if you think about the journey to DevOps, what a lot of companies, what a lot of teams have is maybe they have Jenkins, maybe they have a pipeline running, but that's not the same as as being DevOps in any manner, shape, or form. And then if you try to think about bringing in SRE, where you're looking at having a very clearly defined service level, as well as an error budget in which to make those changes, there's a lot of preliminary work that must be done along 3 tracks. The first is this orientation of we can't take the time we need. This is all the time we have, and we must now re-architect, reorient ourselves to fit within that particular amount of time. The second is in the skills themselves, because unless you do a fair amount of automation, it simply isn't possible for us to be able to hit the kind of expectations that businesses now have. I'll give you an example now. I was working with one of our clients, and it was extremely hard for us to say what the current service levels were because the measurement and the instrumentation itself was all over the place. The servers were being monitored, but that in no way really gives you a sense of what the service capability is. Because of all these layers that you have, you monitor your infra separately, you monitor your network separately, you've got all those in different pockets. But if somebody asks a question, what's the capability that the service is delivering? Measuring that itself becomes a really interesting first step, actually, because complete change from you have all these constituent components and you're measuring those to here's a business service that you're giving your customers and here's the capability of the service. We simply aren't used to thinking that way in a lot of cases.
Monitoring as well is a bit of a fallacy sometimes because we think by monitoring everything that nothing is going to break, but we tend to monitor what we know, and things do
Right.
break. And currently, the culture in a lot of organizations is that breakages are bad, really, really bad,
Yes.
career threatening. And I suppose in SRE, we're trying to change the perception of things breaking to it being more routine, more commonplace, and even something we look to introduce. So I know you mentioned breakages in the topic of your talk. So what's the sort of biggest thing you've seen break?
So, as you said very, very correctly, we start with monitoring. And
Mhm.
that kind of becomes the holy grail in the beginning, right? Well, let's put monitoring. You know what the problem with our SRE is? We don't have enough monitoring, right? So, obviously, what do you need to do? You need to buy a few tools.
Mhm.
Can't do without that. So you spend a lot of time putting those tools in place. And then, like you said very, very correctly, you assume that just because you have the instrumentation in place now, that things are going to be fine. So what we were prepared for is that we would see individual breakages in the layers that we were monitoring. But what we did not anticipate, or what I was surprised by, is the impact that cumulatively these breakages have on the service itself. Because and it's compounded by the fact that you have different groups of people working on each of these things, and they'll come back and tell you, hey, it wasn't my outage, right? I had this little teeny weeny 30-minute outage last week, but there are 17 of these different constituents. And together, if you look at the impact that they're having on the business service itself, then the picture is much less pretty. And that's both a good thing and a bad thing. Because management often has to be told that, look, things probably are much worse than you think they are. And when we put all this in place, and we hold it back, then you'll get a very clear view of where the breaks are in the entire process. And sometimes fixing those breaks are reasonably non-trivial. And that's to do with the way things have already been built. If it's greenfield, it's different. Obviously, you can fix it right there. But the world is a lot messier than that, right? There is existing legacy code, there's existing investments that have gone in on that. And for better or for worse, business is getting done on those systems in whatever sense shape they are in. So it's not a question of being able to throw out everything and bring everything in again fresh. So how do you take the same set of people of code on this journey from where it is today to the place that we want it to go? I think is the really interesting thing about these SRE implementations.
The error budget certainly helps, doesn't it? So the error budget can build an awareness in an organization that things are going to break. And we want to try and react to them and fix them within what we agree is a suitable tolerance. So I think the error budget can be your friend when dealing with breakages as they happen. But it also helps us to focus on reliability. It makes
Yeah.
those breakages more visible and helps prioritize reliability over adding yet more features and pushing more things live. A lot of it's to do with the organization's reaction. So, how do you see the organizations you've worked with change as they move towards SRE?
So organizations have typically seen SRE as a silver bullet, that we've got all these problems, but don't worry, there's SRE. That takes me back to the time when organizations had all these problems, but then we had Agile, right? And so Agile solved everything, and then we know that DevOps solved everything, and now Agile.
A hype curve we often go through with these things. It's really hype at the start, and then actually we realize they aren't silver bullets. They have some good stuff, but never a
Yes.
silver bullet. So yes, that's the trap sometimes with SRE. It's the new martial art on the block.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Correct, absolutely. And then if you have gone through as many agile transformations and DevOps transformations as I have, you'll also see that business understands these changes very differently from IT. Because from a business perspective, I have had more conversations than I should about business saying, but it's agile, you can make this change. Uh, exactly work that way, but yeah, let me explain it to you. Similarly, when you give business an error budget, anyway, immediately what they think of is that if you can schedule it between maybe 3 a.m. to 5 a.m. on Saturday night, or early Sunday morning, then you've got your error budget, and then the service will be up all the time. Not quite. I mean, at least not in the beginning. It is a great place to go to. It is a desirable place, because what businesses really are saying is that I want continuous, high quality, uninterrupted capability that I in turn can offer my customers. And a lot of the companies that we work with really are digital companies. So they have customers that they are servicing with the capabilities online that we are creating for them. And if you think about a product company, their very existence depends on these services running really well. So I think the understanding the desire for results is very much there, which is what is driving this interest as well as investment in SRE. But still, there are too many companies that think that it's a tooling problem or a monitoring problem, and rather than it being a sum total of multiple changes that need to happen.
You mentioned speed and being fast and being able to react to things like outages, but also being able to release changes. Are you seeing that the introduction of SRE is actually making organizations go faster in terms of doing things like more releases, more frequent deployments, that kind of metric?
I wish I had someone really cool to quote this, but I think I read this on a coffee mug somewhere, that if you want to really go faster, you have to go slower first, or something to that effect. So what SRE does, and the journey to SRE does, is it does slow us down in the beginning, because you had these teams who had uninterrupted bandwidth in just trying to push things through the cycle, and they knew how they figured out how to push things through. If something was really important, they knew how to grease the wheels, in a sense. And now what you're asking them is to stop doing that, because you let it fail, and we're going to fix it in a way that it doesn't fail again. And that's a huge change. It also means that something which could have been pushed through is no longer being pushed through, because we're going to take the time to actually do it right. And that's a big change. So the longer term, and I think there's at some point between 3 to 6 months where things begin to fall in place. But the first 3 to 6 months can be frustrating for a lot of people who are part of the SRE process, because they say that what SRE promised us was an ability to be more predictable, to be more reliable in the way that we are pushing these changes through. What you didn't tell us was that we would have to do all these changes. It's not a question of putting in a tool in place and it's all done. But that's something that I think we go through every now and then, that we put in an orchestration tool and pretend that, that's going to somehow improve our code velocity. But having Jenkins has nothing to do with code velocity, because there's just so many other things that we have to do.
Mm-hmm. I think you're mentioning slowing down to go faster again certainly resonates. The first 3 organizations I worked with bringing SRE to the table was because they had these agile DevOps teams flowing features through to production really, really quick, and all of the metrics were in their favor. But unfortunately, they weren't seeing some of the operational impact of what they were delivering. They were again coming back to the silo thoughts. They were a separate silo detached from the reliability of the service. So putting site reliability on the table, sharing those common business goals, building error budgets that everybody can work to, taking the wisdom of production and shifting that left is all part of, first of all, slowing down, but then allowing you to really ramp up speed.
Yes. You said something very interesting just now. You said that the wisdom of production. If you think about it from a business's perspective, though, they don't actually care about it. I mean, from their perspective, it's developed. So what is the problem with now putting it on production, right? I mean, for them, they demand that it be seamless. And that's the journey that we are on. But given the fact that DevOps has sometimes tended to be slightly inward looking or very engineering focused, that it's been very much about what the developers can do and how do we take this bit of code and with one click we've got it on production, without thinking of things like how do we automatically spin up the environments on an on-demand basis, and is that also something that must become part of our DevOps process? I think those are the changes, subtler changes, but very important changes nonetheless, that SRE is really driving. Because the first wave of DevOps was all about increasing the velocity of code, doing all the checks, getting it right first time, putting it on production. But now you're thinking about the process itself and how you can improve the quality of that process, which is the real value that SRE is bringing to the table.
Very much. I mean, the wisdom of production is an interesting one because it is something a lot of organizations are structured against. A lot of government departments, financial services organizations, they actually want less people with the wisdom of production. But actually what we're saying in SRE is that no, we want more people to have that awareness. So we create better and more reliable products. How are you seeing organizations tackle that?
I had one, I'll give you an example. I was working with one organization and we created this capability where obviously there's an end-to-end ability to take code, do all the quality checks and put it on production. And people came and said, that's illegal. I said, what do you mean it's illegal? They said, no, we have this separate group that monitors everything that goes on production and it's their job. And unless they click the button, you can't put code to production. Why not? It's gone through all the checks. We've automated, we've built it as part of the system. Oh, sorry, that's how we work. A lot of these checks and balances were put in place for extremely good reasons in the past, right? When we didn't have this level of automated traceability, really, of every part of the system. If we do not have that level of rigor with regard to logging everything, and logging is a bit of an oversimplification. It's really about having that traceability of all the changes. Then I think people are justified in demanding that we keep those controls in place. So it's a bit of a journey that we need to undergo, and we also need to take everyone through to give them that confidence that, look, that system is now working for you.
Exactly. It's being able to automate a lot of that as well. One of the key challenges that I've seen is trying to get that investment in time, which I think you were referring to earlier in terms of, can we automate some of this stuff rather than it being a manual deployment by a team? Why can't we build that automation? Why can't we look at other areas of what I would describe as toil? You know, those labor intensive, repetitive, non-value adding activities that we should be looking to automate more of.
But Craig, who does the automation? You've got these people who have been toiling away for a period of time. They've been toiling for, let's say, 2 years. And now suddenly we want to automate that task. And is it the same people? Do we send them on a training program for automation, or do we send them to an SRE training course and expect that they now will spend 50% of their time on automation tasks? That's harder than it appears. I mean, when I started, I'd go in and say, people, you know what, I've got great news for you. You don't have to toil as much anymore because we're going to give you these cool capabilities. You now have to think of automation. You have to think of toil reduction, etc. And let me just say that I was more excited than a lot of them were.
The toil doesn't go away overnight. That's the challenge, isn't it? Somebody needs to sort of still deal with that. Otherwise, you start to lose your business support, your business performance.
It reminds me a little bit of the days when we moved a little bit away from manual testing. If you remember those Excel sheets where people used to have their test cases that they had to run. And then even at that time, I tried very hard to say that now you're going to learn automation and become automation testers. It didn't quite work like that even at that time, because I think the orientation, the approach really that people come in, if there's a lot of people who've worked that way for a period of time, you'll actually have to bring in some fresh blood in order to start driving that change.
It's focusing on the area you're also going to get most return. A bit like the test automation question, you automate typically the areas that you are changing a lot because you're going to get more return on your investment. Likewise with SRE and toil, you should be focusing on those high toil activities.
I think what we have been able to do in the quality world is move using automated tools. We are now able to identify the areas of most risk. Like you said, the area of high change is one such area, but there's also areas which require an extreme amount of regulatory compliance, for example, where you cannot make a mistake. You can't make even one mistake. There's also areas which have a high code complexity. So making a change of multiple business rules, etc. If you are able to identify those, then it becomes much easier to focus the effort on. In SRE, I think given where we are right now, I think we kind of go at it all across. We still don't have the tools which give us where to focus on, and we do that differently for each project depending on what we are comfortable with, I fear. But hopefully we look at the data for that project and decide what to start with. But often that becomes the noisiest part of the project rather than really what's the most valuable, if that makes any sense.
Well, for the last question I have, I'd like to return to the subject of your talk, which is what do we break along the way? So as you break things along the way, you learn from those breakages. And ultimately, what you're building towards is less fragile services and products. And anti-fragility is a big term in SRE. So what are you seeing in terms of some of the latest trends in the anti-fragility space?
Yes, one underappreciated area, if you call it monkey testing, you call it chaos testing, etc., is the ability of the system to run tests, to run scenarios where it breaks. Right, our efforts still are in the areas of trying to get it right, get it reliable. But what I think we'll see a lot more going forward, which is at the heart of establishing anti-fragility, is the ability to have the system throw out these conditions, saying what happens if there's a network outage? What happens if the DB is unresponsive? What happens if it takes 180 seconds instead of its usual 7 seconds, right? So these, as long as we have one gentleman or a lady sitting behind a monitor trying to think of these scenarios, there's only so much we can accomplish when it comes to true anti-fragility. It is when the system starts running scenarios and being able to respond as well as recover from those scenarios. That's when I think we will truly achieve anti-fragility. I'm afraid from my personal experience, that's the next step along the journey. I think we're still in this first step where we're trying to get extremely reliable, robust processes. But if you think about the journey between you have all these systems that assist end users in some of these things, and then you augment some of it because it comes and says, hey, we're going to run all these tests, and then you automate it. It automatically runs those tests on an ongoing basis. So we have to go from assist to augment to automate, be able to really get to anti-fragility. Otherwise, the things we're going to be breaking are the fairly traditional items that we break in software development, rather than the ones that we really must focus on to get to extraordinarily resilient systems.
A lot of it's using feedback loops, going back to some of the original agile and lean thinking. Where are you going to get those feedback loops on things that are fragile? A common analogy is when a child is learning to walk and explore the world and bumps into things and falls and experiences pain. You know, it's a bit like the anti-fragility. You go down that journey with baby steps, see what is painful, and you do something about it. You learn from it.
Absolutely. But if I may give one parting thought, it's that the journey for SRE isn't something that has to be treated like a tooling journey, or a journey that has to be that has a very defined end goal, that you're not going to be SRE in 6 months. Because I think what we find is that it's the layers of the onion, right? You peel one and then you find something else to improve, and the deeper you go, it actually gets more interesting from my point of view, but it also gets harder, because it's no longer as easy as identifying the low-hanging fruits that you fix, which give you that initial burst of results. Later, it's about fixing some of the very fundamentals of your architecture, of your setup, which is a lot harder and no longer gives you those quick, easy, visible wins that you get right off in the beginning.
Exactly. Great stuff. Avinash, thank you for the lessons you've shared today and the conversation. Where can people find out more about yourself and the kind of work that you're doing?
LinkedIn's probably the best place. I'm Avinash Rao 09, slightly clunky and inelegant, but unfortunately something I picked in 2009, as you probably might have guessed. Advice to my younger self, pick a better LinkedIn handle, but it's a little bit late for that.
We'll
But
get some links from you, Avinash, and we'll share those as part of the video so people
okay.
can see that without trying to remember it. Avinash, thanks very much for being on the DevOps Online Summit 2021. I've enjoyed talking to you, and good luck to those listening and watching who are taking their baby steps potentially with SRE. My name is Craig Pearson. I've been your host today. Take care, everybody, and thank you.